Hello, and welcome back to this Unexpected Life podcast. This is episode 49. Well, friends, my guest today is a mom named Katie Seelig. She has been married to her husband for 18 years. They live in Western New York and have 6 children whom she homeschools. When her oldest son was 3 years old, his pediatrician discovered that he had scoliosis, which began their journey of being a medical mom. So this conversation with Katie just really impacted me. First of all, she is quietly spoken and so courageous. She has learned how to advocate for her son who has a rare neuromuscular condition. And in our conversation today, we covered the topic of vulnerability, how she chooses to take care of herself with her busy life, and how the conversations that she has with her children about her son's condition and all the questions that our kids ask us about why did God allow me to be this way? You're going to enjoy this conversation with Katie Seelig. Today, my guest is Katie Seelig, and I'm so glad to have you today. So, Katie, can you just tell the guests a little bit of an overview about your family, where you're from, all the fun details?
We are a large family. My husband and I have 6 children together, ages ranging from 17 to 2. I homeschool, and our oldest son, who is 13, I would say probably when he was 3 around there, is when the pediatrician noticed that he had scoliosis, which he was like, that's just super weird for someone so young to have such a dramatic curve. But we always knew something was off, so like it wasn't a surprise. And it's just been a journey since then, trying to put pieces together and understand how to care for him best.
So, you said that you kind of suspected that something was going on. Like, when did that start? And then what was this unexpected journey that noticing the scoliosis had? Where did that take you guys?
Yeah, when he was born, whenever we would change his diaper, it was really difficult to pull his legs down and pry his legs apart to wipe. And I remember our pediatrician at the time thought maybe it was hip dysplasia. So she had us actually go to a specialist that my husband saw. He has had a rare disease called Ollier's, and that's where like the leg length is different. And it happened to be the same doctor he saw. He dismissed it, said he looks fine. I don't really see anything weird or off. And he wasn't meeting regular gross motor milestones. He didn't crawl until he was about 12 months. He didn't stand until he was about 18 to 2 months. And around 3, he kind of started really walking. Everything else seemed fairly typical. I mean, he definitely had some sensory issues. I'm sure he's got some neurospicy in there somewhere. We haven't ventured there, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's got some sort of processing. There could be a label for that. But when he was 3, during the well check, they have them bend over and they do the test, and he's like, oh wow, we had changed pediatricians, and I was grateful that he was very proactive. That led to seeing a neurologist. She didn't know what to do. She knew he looked different and presented different in his movements. And so she was great. She recorded a whole PT session and then sent it to the genetics board and to neuromuscular. And that resulted in an MRI of his spine. That looked fine, other than the scoliosis. And then they did a muscle biopsy and genetic testing. And the muscle biopsy revealed that his CK levels were wherever they needed to be to indicate that he had a neuromuscular disease. And the blood work for his DNA, for his genetic testing, pulled up a gene mutation of FLNC, and I don't know the variant. The variant is the important part, because they've seen FLNC, they've not seen his variant before, and they don't have a name for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, how did that make you feel? I can imagine loneliness because, the doctors are going, we don't have a name for this. Where did that take you?
It did feel lonely. One of the biggest things they were saying is that we don't really know what the outcome, what to expect. We're just going to continue to check all of his major muscular, like his lungs, his heart, and all of the things that they kept wanting to know how was his feeding, and his feeding seemed slow, but decent. It made me feel really, really scared, and I do remember looking back. Of course, this is how we do it, right? Looking back, and I'm remembering that there was so much, like, anxiety isn't even the right word. It was almost just do the next thing that needs to happen, and every time we went to appointment, new news came, and it was usually not great news. And at that point, we lived in like this slum house. Our landlord was awful, just like all of this stuff. And my father had just passed, and it was just a really rough time. And so I remember specifically just being like, hey, push this down. Like, just don't deal with it, and just keep going on.
So when did it come to the surface for you? I mean, eventually all the things you push down, they rise up, don't they?
They certainly do. I think once we were more stable, we had bought a home, our first home, and I was pregnant with our fifth, and the pregnancy was fine. And I just remember after having him, I had some really bad postpartum depression. And I grew up not dealing with problems. I don't know if it was like our parents' generation. It was just, shh, you're fine. Don't talk about it. Which is strange because I do remember being in therapy as a child. And I am currently in therapy again, and I am very thankful for it. But I just remember dealing with postpartum anxiety and depression, and realizing that physically I was starting to break down. I was at my heaviest weight. I literally thought I was dying at one point, and I had some testing done, and it turns out I had an autoimmune disease, which I firmly to this day believe that because I didn't deal with things, and I just kind of pushed things down, that was like a perfect storm. And God was like, hey, you got to deal with this. You gotta come to me. I had been coming to him with the things, but there's a difference between, we say we lay it down. We lay it down at the altar, and we lay it down. And then like 5 minutes later, I pick it back up, and I'm like, well, I can take care of this. I'm meant to take care of this, which I am, but some things are completely out of your control, and you just really got to accept that, which sucks.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I noticed just about your story is you had to come to the place where you really laid it down. And then that's not to say that, again, we still don't have to learn that lesson over and over and over again. And I do believe what you're saying. When we stuff and we try to handle it all on our own, and then we don't talk about it, it does affect us mentally, spiritually, physically, our health, and all of that. And I just admire your bravery and courage for finally just, saying, I need some help. And I love how you mentioned that you're in therapy. I'm in therapy too. And this is a place that I think for a long time, especially if we grew up in church, it was a similar thought of, shh, don't talk about it. It's, you got to handle this on your own, just you and Jesus, just you and Jesus. And I agree that God is everything we need, but he also created us for community and to share our stories in these spaces. They know that the brain heals neurologically. Just you and I having this conversation today, like the neurons are firing, and the empathy and reading someone's face and being able to talk through that. I think is so important. So I'm going to switch gears, I guess, just a little bit. So fast forward, and your son's been diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease. What does day-to-day life look like for you and your family? And I know you homeschool, which we've connected on that. And some people might say, oh, why do you do that? So maybe walk us through a little bit of that, and then also what daily life looks for you.
Sure. By and large, looking at him on the outside, he looks typical. He presents as like a typical kid. Other than when he walks, you can see that there's a gait, and soaking wet, he's like 70 pounds, and he's 13, and he's 5'2", 5'3". Daily life is homeschool, trying to get the best education I can for them. And I think personally, my conviction for it is there's just a lot that's being taught in the world that I don't think is going to add value to my children. And we only get such a short time with our children that I think it's paramount that the character building and the confidence that I get to pour into them. It's really, people are like, oh, it's such a sacrifice. I'm like, it is, but it's not. If I think about, I have some friends that they recently had to put their children, she had to put her children in public school, and she's already come up against bullying and some things that they're not productive for education. But that's just my personal thoughts and conviction. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we all have to pick and choose the path that God has for us. And some of us go to kicking and screaming, which is how I did. But we're all choosing the thing that we feel like God's calling us to. And I think that that's what is important. And I think sometimes, some of the advantages when you have a child with disabilities and special needs is you already feel like you're going in all these opposite directions anyway, with doctor's appointments and therapy and all the things. I felt like I had more time with my kids than I would have had because we were doing life together at home every day. And that was a plus. That was a plus. So how do you take care of yourself? So you've got a lot going on. You've got 6 kids, 2 to 17, and you're homeschooling. Have you found just a few small things that are really important for you to just continue to be able to be the mom and the wife and all the things that God's calling you to be?
I'm still learning.
I was going to say, with the caveat that none of us are doing it perfectly right here. Like, this is real life.
Well, I think too, like the strange thing about I'm going to be 44, starting perimenopause. And I'm like, what do I even like to do? Even know, like I've talked with friends too, and they're like, this is such a strange season because it's like you've literally lived your life in service of another person. And so, my therapist is always, do self-care. And I don't know what I like to do. But I would say things that definitely help me stay grounded is remembering that I have a community and a body that I belong to at the church, with the church. I'm part of the church, and it becomes like such an exhale that you can, oh, awesome. This burden is so very heavy, and I really don't need to carry it alone. I can really bring it to a sister in church and just be like, hey, I'm dealing with A, B, and C. And sometimes I don't even have to go into detail. I know someone's praying for me, and I can feel the weight of the prayer and the lifting of the burden. I would say that is my number one self-care tip.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing too is that the church really is a place to have surgery, like your heart. But I think the thing to remember is that you have to go expecting, you have to go being vulnerable, which is hard sometimes. Especially, I think I've heard on some of your episodes, some of your guests as well, where, and I don't think people intentionally do this. I'll say to myself, no one understands. No one's got a kid like my kid. And it doesn't always have to look just like what our story looks like for someone to have the compassion and the ability to pray with that compassion. God will honor that, and he'll honor your submission to being vulnerable, and the healing will come. And I'm not saying that things still don't hurt, and I'm not, gosh, this is amazing. I have such a great time with all these difficulties because we're supposed to be thankful, which I am. But there's a beauty in the chaos and the brokenness. And when a forest fire burns down, it grows back and it grows back and actually makes life flourish more. So I don't know. For what it's worth, I think just go ahead and ugly cry,
Yeah.
in front of the church if you need to, so you can get prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, two key things that you said is, for those of you who are listening who are thinking about how you can support someone, is sometimes we just don't have the words. And you said you don't always have to explain it, but they're just present with compassion, which I think is such a huge piece. But that also on our part requires us some level of vulnerability to be willing to step in that space and say, I need help. And we're not supposed to do this on our own. And I think that is so important. So I know, kind of off mic, we've talked about this a little bit, but so what do you do when your child asks hard questions? Like, I think you've even mentioned that he might ask, am I going to die? How do you deal with that as a mom?
The first, I think he may have asked that. He may have asked that twice. And the first time he was fairly young, and I remember having to step back and kind of collect my emotions, because that's like I don't really have an answer for you. Like I can't say yes or no. I remember just thinking, bring light to him, give him some sort of hope or light, because I think he was like 8 or 9 at the time. We had just had a surgeon, who I fired very promptly, tell him that he had to have a spinal fusion, which he just had, but she was going over all of the possibilities that could happen during surgery, and he was 9, and she's like, you could die because you have a bad heart. Your heart could give away on the table, and you could die that way. Your lungs could collapse, and you could die that way, or you could get an infection afterwards, and you could die that way. And I'm like, you need to stop talking right now. Like, these are conversations you should have with just me, not in front of my 9-year-old son. But I remember saying to him, it's the verse in Jeremiah where he talks about, I know the plans I have for you. And I went over that whole verse, plans to prosper, plans for good. And I was like, I don't know. He's also asked, why did God make me this way? And my response was like, I don't know why he made you this way, but just because your heart and your muscles and your spine and your lung, like all of it, just because it works differently than mine, doesn't mean that you're not complete, that you're not whole. And he made you perfect, because God doesn't make mistakes. And so rest assured that he knows what's going on inside of you, and he's got a plan for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I just love that answer. The truth is, we don't always have good answers, and that's okay too. It's so hard to handle our kids' tough questions, and I've been in that space also. But I think you just redirecting him back to the fact that God does not make mistakes, and he has a plan. And I think it's so hard. Good job firing that doctor, because, oh goodness.
I'm still angry, as you can tell. It's been many years, and I'm still like, don't see her. People ask, who's the best, in our city?
Sure.
And I'm like, not her.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to not have the wisdom to speak that way in front of a
Yeah.
child is
The amazing part is after we had fired her, both my husband and I were dumbfounded. She was the only surgeon in our city. And so I went to 2 neighboring cities trying to find a better doctor. The first one, insurance wouldn't cover because it was out of network. The second one, we were steered away from because he had high infection rates after surgery and people were dying because of how infected they were getting. But while that was all happening, while we were doing that, what he does, and he was putting the pieces together, and so many parents had kind of advocated and complained about this doctor that they hired an additional doctor, and it was right in time for when he needed, like, we couldn't wait any longer. That was the perfect timing, and his surgery happened shortly after.
Wow. That is an incredible story of God's provision, of just taking this path. I was reminded today on a webinar I was teaching about lament that we are going to go through the valley of the shadow of death, but He is with us. And we see that. We see that in the evidence of your testimony that I think is so important.
It reminds me of the other verse where, and again, I know my Bible, but I don't always know exactly where the verse is. But while you go through the valley of weeping, make a well. And I remember a sermon one time where our pastor just kept talking about, dig that well. You might be in that place, just go ahead and dig it. And that was definitely a place that we dug, because we had to trust that it was going to work out. And in the notes, we were talking about stewardship. That was definitely one of the things. And I'm like, okay, what can I do? What can I research? Who can I look for that would be good for him? And just trusting that it was going to work out. And it did.
Yeah. So explain what you mean by stewardship as a mom to a child with disabilities and special needs.
I think we all have our unique personalities. I am, by nature, I'm Irish. And so I have like a very fiery, I can get a quick temper. I've mellowed through the years, but I'm also very introverted and very passionate. And it's really difficult for me to speak up and be an advocate. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to, butt heads, if you will, with a doctor when you know that they're not providing the kind of care he needs. And what I mean by steward is doing that. God entrusted him into my care. It's funny when new moms are like, what's the best advice you could give? And I'm like, listen to the Holy Ghost inside of you, because he gave you that child, and you're going to know what he needs, what that child needs. Yeah, just stepping outside of your comfort zone to provide what might be needed in the moment. And I think that's it can be a really hard thing to do. Yeah, I've had doctors be very, very hurtful with their speech. But had I not spoken up, my son wouldn't have gotten medication when he needed it. Or they would have given him medication and sent us home, and it could have been bad at home had we not been in the hospital setting.
Yeah, and I think that's what faithfulness looks like. That's what stewardship looks like, is depending on the Lord, but serving our children the best way that we can. And like you said, listening to the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, who is, I think, gives us really good mom gut instincts to go, that's probably not going to work. That probably will. I mean, not that we know everything. I don't think we do, but
Right.
I think a lot of medical mamas can attest to the fact that once we have that baby or child as they're diagnosed, we just have this extra gift from the Holy Spirit to have some extra discernment in this space as we care for our child. And I think that's just such a blessing too. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and just talk about the siblings and this large family dynamic that you have. What has this journey looked like for your other children?
It's been bumpy. It's been beautiful. There's definitely been very, very beautiful moments. I would say the bumpy moments are very few and far in between. But a lot of the hard times, the hard questions or the hard moments. One of my daughters, they're the older two, the ones that are right before him. I remember when they were younger, when he just started seeing specialist after specialist, and we were out of the home a lot. I remember one of them saying something to the effect of, "Why do you love him more than us?" And I, again, that Irish part of me was just like, and I had to, again, just kind of take a step back and not say what I wanted to say. I had to say, it isn't that I love him more. It's that he requires more medical attention. He needs more attention in certain ways than you do. And I very gently said, it's not when we go out, we're not having a fun time. We're not going to amusement parks, and we're not doing fun things. It's not an enjoyable time typically for either of us. And that you're not missing out. That fear of missing out was very real. And I'm like, you're not going to enjoy these things. That was really hard. And as they grew, the older girls, they became the people that when he wouldn't confide in me what he was feeling, because he said before in the past, how are you? I'm like, how are you? Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Oh, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to share. I don't want to put more on you. You've got enough on you, Mom. But he would go to them and he would talk with them. And so whatever animosity or any negative feelings that they may have had when they were younger, they learned to grow out of and see him as somebody who is an equal, but also someone who needed an ear. And one of them, actually the same one that used to say, "Do you love him more?" She told me one time, he's like, I'm really scared about this up and coming surgery." She's like, "Yeah, I would imagine you would be. I think anyone would be." And he's like, "Yeah, but I know that God's with me, and I know when I pray, he hears me. So I know that if I feel weak, I know that he's going to be strong for me." And she said that he also expressed, he was really young, he also expressed that he was afraid his friends were going to make fun of him because he was going to look different and he was going to walk different for quite some time, and or he might not honestly ever walk again, which was not a possibility. She's like, "Well, you don't have friends like that, but if you did, better believe I'd take care of them." That's amazing. I love that.
Yes. Yes. We all need those people in our corner to listen. And I just want to point out too that, our reaction is definitely to put up these defenses of like, I'm doing the best I can and I've got a lot on my plate. And sometimes we do that, right? We fall apart. Let's just be honest. We do. But there are moments, like you said, when you're just okay, I got to hold this and respond in grace and love and affirmation. So, the other siblings and our child feel seen of just those feelings, because we don't want them to do what you mentioned earlier, which is just to stuff it and not talk about it with us. That is so, so key and so valid. Do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's ironic. We both, my husband and I, when we were probably around the time when I started to fall apart and realized that I needed to process emotions and grief and all of the things, we both agreed that we were going to do things differently than the way we were raised. It was just very paramount. We needed to be different. I grew up I grew up as like a holiday Christian, like a holiday Catholic, and he grew up his whole life in church. So we have a very different childhood, but we both didn't know how to process emotions. Like, we weren't taught to do that.
Yeah.
And we wanted to provide a place for our kids to be able to do that. Even now, sometimes, like, when the teens kind of get a little back talky, and I'm like, I hear that you're having an issue, but could you do that a little kinder? Could you say it a little kinder? I want to hear your problem. I want to hear your thoughts, but just be respectful.
Yes.
Do respect, please.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't even need to do that. I'll just put the mom face on, and they're like, ooh, I could have done that better.
Right. Yeah. And it is, I mean, it's that attunement that I think a lot of times we don't always get that in our childhood, right? We didn't get the safe place to process and to even learn what to do with them, that their, feelings are signals, they're things to be curious about, but we don't want them, directing the ship of our lives. And I just admire how you're working through that with your kids. So, what are some practical ways that you have helped your other children and your son feel seen and valued individually?
Practical. I've offered therapy to find a right therapist for a couple of them. He sees a therapist, and he really likes going to see her. We have a child life specialist that before any major surgeries, she comes out and she will speak with him about what's going to be happening. Do you have questions? And then she will speak with the other children, especially the younger ones who might not quite have the language, because
Yes.
he's 7 now. The 7 and the 10, 11, he'll be 11 tomorrow. They don't quite have the language for it sometimes. And I remember when we first started having Child Life come out for procedures, surgeries, I remember at first having this shame and this guilt, being like, I can do this. Like, I can do what they're doing. But I thought, it's a help. They're literally trained to talk about the medical things and the emotions, and they can separate themselves. It's not like they're the mom and the kid makes a face and like suddenly I know, like, he's thinking this. She doesn't know that, but she can just cut through all of that and be like, just what they're trained to do. And I had to suck it up and be like, no, this is a good thing. This is a good support. Having that as support, doing therapy for some of the children and myself, trying to, especially with the boys, because we have 4 boys, trying to get them physically active, which I am a homebody and I would rather just not see people sometimes. I'd rather just kind of listen to music and write or whatever. But, getting them out to the gym, getting them out to the playground. And even I find when I finally do something, like I go and get on the treadmill or I walk for 15, 20 minutes, my brain is clearer. And I know it produces some chemical. Is it oxytocin? Dopamine?
Dopamine, I think.
Dopamine.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that's good. We need that. So those are some, I would say, some pretty practical.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you talked about not the guilt piece, but that you worked through the guilt of, well, I could do this, but it's okay to delegate it to that child life specialist. And just to, if you don't know about child life specialist, listener, in the world of children's hospitals, tap into that resource. Not every hospital has them, but a lot of them have them now. It's been a growing field through the years, and it is such a useful resource because they can not only make the patient feel seen, they can also make the siblings feel seen. That's been my experience also in yours. So I think that's a huge practical tool that I think is very vital.
We also have a program through, I believe it's through our insurance. Or maybe it's through the hospital. Either way, it's called Compassion Net, and I know not every state has it. but that's the child life specialist would come to the home. He also has a nurse, and we also have a social worker. And they sometimes provide sibling events or family events. And sometimes there's even like group therapy sessions, which has been really amazing. But if there's a resource available, I would say, if to somebody who's might be on the fence about it, why not?
Yeah.
Dive in. It'll take something off your plate. And I remember growing up thinking, oh, that therapist they're not, their intentions for me aren't good, or they're judging or whatever, like whatever the thought process might be. Dive into it. Clearly, like pray about it, pray for the right person to be assigned to you. And they will be, just trust that it'll work out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really, really good practical advice. So just as we wrap up here, first of all, is there anything just on your heart that you would like to share with us?
I suppose just going back to the being vulnerable. I know that we've talked about this. I've commented on your Facebook about grief. It doesn't end. I think some people think grief is just death, but it's not. I'm very content and happy with our life. Blessed and very grateful to have the opportunities and to have the children and to be able to stay at home and do all of the things. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a sorrow about, like, I wish he could do A, B, and C when he was younger. He's like, I want to be a gymnast. And I'm like, he'll never be a gymnast, buddy. He'll never do that. There's just some things that he'll never be able to do, or that the way that life doesn't look the way that I really thought it was going to look. Don't be afraid to cry.
Yeah.
I remember there was a period when I really thought, like, man, I'm just complaining to God. I'm just complaining to the Lord. The burden isn't heavy for him. And it's not news to him. He's not like, oh man, she really is a mess right now. Like, he knows. He knows before you know that you're a mess. He knows that you're breaking and that the smallest breeze could knock you over because you're so just out of it. And I would just encourage someone to be, I think sometimes you think you're going to drown in it and you'll never come back, but you will. And I think that we, as a society, haven't learned to work through it. We think we're going to stay stuck, but he's there with you. He's not going to forsake you in it.
Yeah. On that note, I just want to thank you, Katie, for your vulnerability today and for sharing with us. I know a little bit about your journey, and I know that it's taken a lot of courage for you to get to this point. And I just want to leave you and the guests who are the listeners with this reminder of what you just said, that the burden isn't too heavy for him. So thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.